Today we are going to bake a loaf of sourdough bread from start to finish. We will be using my sourdough starter has been going for several years now, so we won't be building the actual starter, but we will go from having not been fed at all, which it is right now, has been in the refrigerator for probably about 2-3 weeks, I think, since I last made any, and all the way down to a beautiful loaf of bread. So just taking it out of the fridge, we're going to let it come up to room temperature. It's going to take a little bit of time, probably a couple of hours, and then we will feed it. All right, it has been about 2 hours now, I would say. And the reason I do this, you could absolutely feed as soon as you pull it out of the fridge. However, it just makes it easier to mix when it's all nice and warm, room temperature-ish. And oh, I didn't show you, but there was some kind of gray watery stuff looking on the top, and that's completely normal. Happens whenever your sourdough starter has sat for a while, and just mix it right in. All right, so we are going to get some water and flour and our scale out and get this fed. Actually, here is a really good example of the blue, the kind of grayish liquid on top here. This is some old discard that I've been saving because I have a really yummy sourdough discard cracker recipe. So I'm actually going to add my discard from this to this one. And you want to have about 100 grams of starter. So this container weighs about 46 grams, so we want to get rid of about 200 grams or so. That to the side. I am just going to scrape down the sides of this really quick. Try to keep the container a little less goopy. All right, we are going to tear that out, and we're going to add 100 grams of warm water. Not hot, but warm. Oops. It doesn't have to be exact. And the reason you use warm water, you could use cold water, it's fine. But warm, yeast likes some warmth, doesn't like heat, it likes some warmth. And this helps it just grow a little bit faster when you use warm water. All right, got that mixed in, and now we're going to add approximately 100 grams of flour. And if you don't have a scale, you can absolutely use volume measurements, and you would just have a cup of starter, a cup of flour, and a cup of water. And this is just all-purpose white flour. You want to give that a really good mix. Get the flour all the way spread through it, because that is what your yeast is going to feed on. Make it nice and bubbly. All right, we're just going to put the cap on this guy and then let this set on the counter probably for another hour or so. Since it is at room temperature, it shouldn't take that long to kind of double in size and then settle down. Honestly, as long as it's doubled in size, I use it. You'll often hear people say that it needs to go rise all the way up and then deflate back down before you're supposed to use it. I don't know, I've always had fine luck using it as long as it is clearly showing that it's active. So I'm going to set this on the counter, and this discard is going to go back in the fridge until I have time to do the cracker recipe. And the reason I'm doing this right now is my stepdaughter Quinn, I gave her some starter back at Christmas, and she just hasn't had the greatest of luck. So she asked me for a step-by-step guide, and I have done all of the steps of making sourdough loaf in various videos, but I've never done it from start to finish all in one video where it's all laid out. So that's why we are doing this today. Good morning. It is the next day. I got a little wrapped up doing some stuff out in the garden that really needed to get done, and our sourdough is completely fine. So I'm not sure if you can see, but it's got lots of little bubbles, and it did rise and fall, not quite all the way half, but you can kind of see that line where it rose up to and then dropped a little bit. So we are in perfect position to use this right now. So we are going to start with our starter, and we are going to put about 200 grams of starter into our bowl. Go. And then this should be just enough to feed again for our next time, but we'll set that aside for right now. Then to this, I'm going to tear that out again. We're going to put 350 grams of water. And that is about 1.5 cups of water. I'm just going to take this off, and we are going to stir the starter into the water so it's thoroughly mixed. And again, I'm using just warm water, just a little bit over room temperature. All right, put this guy back on here. And then I'm going to add about 450 to 500 grams of flour. And this is completely to get it, you add as much as you need to get it to the consistency that you want. But typically it's around 450 to 500. So we're going to start with 475, which was about, I think that was like 3¼ cups of flour. If you are using a scale, make sure you don't mix your dough on the scale. You want to take your bowl off, and then you just give this a good mix until all of the flour is incorporated. And this is going to be a very sticky dough. It's a highly hydrated, so don't expect that it's going to look like a nice dough, because it will not yet. So this is actually looking like the perfect amount. Of flour, so we will stick with that. All right, it has been a little over an hour. Again, none of this stuff has to be exact, like timings and stuff. You want to at least give it 45 minutes to rise in between each of these times, but it can definitely be more than that. It doesn't matter. More than 45 minutes to an hour. So first things first, we are actually going to start with some salt. We're going to do 1 tablespoon and just sprinkle it over the top of the dough. And there are differing reasons for why you don't add the salt now. I think one of them has to do with flavor, but in my mind, the only reason you wouldn't is because salt inhibits yeast growth, and so if you put it on, it just takes longer to start growing. That's my mindset about it. Anyway, so we're going to take some fresh water, and we're just going to sprinkle it on to kind of get the salt all wet. And then you're going to dip both hands in the water. Actually, you really only need one. And you're going to just squeeze the dough until you can't feel any salt crystals anymore. And this is super obvious. As soon as you try doing it, you'll know what I'm talking about. It seems odd that you'd be able to feel that few salt crystals, but you definitely can. And it doesn't take much. But that way you know that it's gotten completely through the dough and has dissolved. And when you're working with a really wet dough like this, using water to make it so it doesn't stick to your hands is the best way to go. Flour is not, I do not recommend it. You will just end up with gluey, clumpy mitts on your hands. All right, so now that the salt is mixed in, you are just going to take one edge of the dough and kind of stretch it up and then push it down in the middle and go all the way around, doing that a couple of times until you have a nice dough ball. And it's kind of a little awkward this time because you've been squishing through it with your hands for the salt. And you just flip it upside down, and now you will have a dough ball that looks like this. Still very liquidy, as you can see, very sticky. All right, and we are just going to cover this back up and let it set for another hour. Just want to show you what this is looking like now. It does kind of starts looking a little liquidy the longer that it sits, and that's totally normal. See, very, very sticky still. And we are going to do another set of the stretch and folds. So again, just take a chunk of it, pull it up, push it down into the middle. And I usually go around twice until it's kind of formed into a nice stiff ball again. And that's what will happen, is it will start to stiffen up. And all this is doing is building gluten, which is what gives you your structure for your bread. And then once again, we will just turn it over and plop it in there like that. And we will come back one more hour and do this again. And at that point, we will put it into the refrigerator overnight. Well, we'll shape it and then put it into the refrigerator overnight. We are to the last stretch and fold. However, we're going to do it slightly differently this time because we are also going to be shaping it into the loaf. So we are going to get a piece of parchment paper. Let me move it so you guys can actually see what I'm doing here. And sprinkle it pretty liberally with some flour. Spread that around inside for a second. And come to our dough. And as you can see, it has now risen quite significantly. It has some nice big air bubbles in it. And we're going to get both of our hands wet. Pretty wet. And then we are just going to go down, excuse me, both sides and go all the way underneath and then lift up and kind of fold it under itself. And then twist it 90 degrees and do the same thing. And you're going to do this a couple of times until you have formed a really nice loaf-looking shape. And then when you have that, you're just going to stick it on your parchment paper like so. I didn't put it very centered in my parchment paper, but that's okay. And you're just going to stick it back in your bowl. Just like this. Now, you definitely see a lot of people will put this on a towel, and then when they go to cook it, they flip it upside down, and so the bottom is what then becomes the top. But honestly, that's a lot of work, and I've always found the towel sticks to it really badly no matter how much flour I use, and then I have a flour covered towel, and this is just, it works just as well, because then all you're going to do tomorrow is lift this out and put it into your Dutch oven. So now we are just going to cover this, and it is going to go into the fridge overnight to develop lots of yummy sourdough flavor. And I didn't say, but I did sprinkle, again, a pretty generous amount of flour on the top of this because I don't want the plastic to stick to it when I take it off tomorrow. Just like that. Now it's going to go in the fridge. Good morning, you guys. So I am just pulling our dough out of the fridge and it looks great. So we are going to just let this kind of come up to temperature a tiny bit, not a whole lot. And while that is happening, we are going to preheat our oven to 95. Try that again. 495. And we are going to put our Dutch oven into the oven to heat with it. And I believe this is a 3-quart. I'm going to have to look it up. But I'm pretty sure this is a 3-quart Dutch oven. And you could use a bigger one, but you would want to probably use more dough. So maybe even double it if you're going to use a 5-quart, or it just will end up spreading too much and you won't have a nice rise on your loaf in the oven. All right, we're just going to put this in here. I typically don't put the lid in, I just put the pan. So I'm actually going to let the oven preheat for about an hour, and that will give our dough some time to come up to temperature a little bit before we put it in the pan and start baking it. All right, oven has been heating for a good chunk of time now, and we are going to plop our bread right in there like that. And just take a knife, or if you have a lame, I think that's what they're called, you can use that. I just do a very simple cross to score this, although I will admit that I have completely forgotten to do this, and it comes out fine, just a little misshapen, because then it chooses its own places to split open. Like, it's not very sharp. All right, and then we're going to put the lid on, and we are going to bake this for 15 to 20 minutes with the lid on. You want it to have basically set up before you take the lid off to start the browning. And then when you take the lid off, we are going to lower the temperature to 475 and then bake it for another 15 to 20 minutes. So I will see you guys when we are pulling it out of the oven. Oh my gosh, it smells so good in here. And this is looking just beautiful. However, give you guys a quick glance at it here. I am going to take the temperature. We want the temperature to be, if you're 1,000 feet or below sea level, you want your temperature to be around 203, 204. For me, I tend to aim for more like 195-ish. So we are really, really close at 190, so I'm going to give it a couple more minutes. We should be almost there. Perfect. We are at 196, so this can come out. Oven off, and very carefully lift this guy out. Oh, it does look beautiful. And you don't want to leave it on the paper because it will get soggy. And a look at that. Perfect. And that's it, you guys. That is how we do sourdough here from start to finish. A couple other quick notes for you. You definitely don't have to let it set overnight in the refrigerator. I have baked it after I did the final, kind of pulling up and folding under to shape it into a loaf. I have put it right into the oven after that. You can also make this into baguettes. I would add a little bit more flour if you're going to do that, because you do need to actually shape the baguettes a bit more, and you don't want it quite as sticky. So I'd probably add another 50 to 100 grams of flour if you're going to make it into baguettes. You can easily add things into it. I often add cheese, as you guys have seen probably in the past, but there's all kinds of additives you can put in if you would like. But it really is very simple, and it's more that it's just kind of time consuming because it does have all of the stretch and folds in it. So I hope you guys give it a try and let me know if you do and how it turns out. I'll see you next time. Bye.